Deep in the vacuum of space, the James Webb Telescope picked up something impossible. A signal from beyond the edge of the observable universe, pulsing with a rhythm that defied every law of physics we understood. When NASA decoded it, they heard a voice speaking in every human language at once. Scientists called it a cosmic anomaly. But then the insomnia started. Millions of people worldwide couldn't sleep. Mathematicians woke up with equations they couldn't explain. Telescopes turned themselves toward an empty patch of sky that shouldn't exist. A linguist, an astrophysicist, and a priest were brought together to decode the message before it finished transmitting. What they discovered would shake humanity to its core. But here's the question that haunts them still. What happens when you accept an invitation you were never meant to receive? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at her kitchen window in Cambridge, watching the first light of dawn paint the Charles River in shades of amber and rose. The apartment felt too large now, too quiet. It had been 8 months since Robert's funeral, and she still found herself setting 2 coffee cups on the counter each morning before remembering. The second cup would sit there untouched until she poured it down the sink before leaving for MIT. At 58, Sarah had devoted her life to languages. Not the living ones that people spoke on street corners and in cafes, but the dead ones. Ancient Sumerian, Proto-Indo-European, the lost dialects of civilizations that had crumbled to dust millennia ago. Her colleagues called it academic archaeology. Robert had called it beautiful. He understood that every extinct language was a unique way of seeing the world, forever silenced. She had met Robert at a linguistics conference in Beijing 30 years ago. He was presenting on Mandarin tonal patterns. She was arguing that modern linguistic theory ignored the philosophical implications of language death. They had married within a year. No children. Their work was their legacy. They had been content with that choice, at least until the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months from first symptom to his final breath. Sarah shook her head, dispelling the memory. She had work to do. Her translation database was nearly complete, a comprehensive archive of every documented human language, living and dead, organized by linguistic family and historical period. 40 years of research, coded into elegant algorithms that could identify patterns across millennia and continents. It was her life's achievement, even if only a handful of specialists would ever appreciate it. Her phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Dr. Chen. The voice was crisp, professional, female. This is Director Helen Park from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. I apologize for the early call, but we have a situation that requires your immediate expertise. Sarah set down her coffee. NASA had never contacted her before. What kind of situation? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. We're sending a car to pick you up within the hour. Pack for a week. The project is classified, and I'm afraid I can't tell you more over an unsecured line. I have classes to teach. We've already spoken with MIT. Your department chair has been briefed. Dr. Chen, I wouldn't ask if this weren't critical. We need the world's foremost expert in comparative linguistics, and according to every colleague we consulted, that's you. Sarah looked around her empty apartment. What did she have to stay for? 1 hour? I'll be ready. 3,000 miles away, Dr. Marcus Webb sat in his office at Goddard Space Flight Center, staring at data that shouldn't exist. At 62, Marcus had spent his entire career studying the cosmos. He had discovered 3 exoplanets, contributed to the design of the James Webb Space Telescope, and published over 200 papers on stellar formation and deep space phenomena. He understood the universe's rules, its patterns, its predictable majesty. This signal violated every rule he knew. It had appeared 3 days ago in the telescope's deep field observations. At first, he thought it was equipment malfunction or interference from Earth-based sources. But the pattern was too precise, too regular. A pulse that repeated every 3.4159 seconds, pi, the mathematical constant that appeared nowhere in natural cosmic phenomena. Marcus had kept it classified, reporting only to Director Park. He needed time to analyze it, to understand it, before triggering a panic. But the more he studied the signal, the less sense it made. It originated from a point beyond the observable universe, from a region of space that should contain nothing but the faint echo of the Big Bang. Yet the signal was strong, growing stronger each day, and it contained structure, information, meaning. He had divorced his wife 15 years ago. She had wanted more of him than he could give. Their daughter Amanda was 30 now, living in Seattle with her own family. Marcus spoke to her maybe twice a year. Brief, awkward conversations where they discussed weather and work, carefully avoiding deeper territory. He had chosen his career over his family. Some days he believed it had been worth it. This discovery might justify that choice. Or it might reveal how foolish he had been, spending decades staring at the stars while neglecting the people who loved him. His office door opened without knocking. Director Park entered, followed by a man Marcus didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a Roman collar. "Marcus, this is Father Thomas Riley," Park said. "He'll be joining the analysis team." Marcus stood, extending his hand. "A priest. Ellen, what exactly are we dealing with here?" Thomas's grip was firm, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm also a physicist, Dr. Webb. MIT, class of 1982. I worked at CERN for 7 years before I took my vows." Why would a physicist become a priest? Why would an astrophysicist work 100-hour weeks while his family fell apart? Thomas's voice was gentle, not accusatory. We both had our reasons for changing course." Marcus felt his face flush. He gestured to the chairs. "Fair enough. Director Park, you want to tell me why we're assembling this particular team?" Park sat, her expression grave. "Because the signal isn't just a signal. We had our best cryptographers analyze it. They found language patterns, human language patterns, thousands of them overlapping, cycling through every documented tongue, including dead ones. That's why we need Dr. Chen." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "Natural phenomena don't produce language, and nothing human could broadcast from beyond the observable universe." "I know," Park replied, "which is why we also need Father Riley. Because if this isn't natural and isn't human, we're in theological territory." Thomas leaned forward. "I've been consulting with the Vatican archives. There are historical accounts of similar phenomena. The Church has been tracking unusual cosmic events for centuries. We have records going back to the Middle Ages of priests and mystics reporting voices from the stars, always dismissed as religious ecstasy or madness. But the descriptions match what you've detected." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying this has happened before?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps those earlier accounts were something else entirely. Either way, we need to consider possibilities beyond conventional science. I deal in evidence, not faith." "So do I," Thomas said. "Faith and evidence aren't opposites, Dr. Webb. They're different tools for understanding reality. Sometimes you need both." Father Thomas Riley had not always been a man of the cloth. 30 years ago, he had been Dr. Thomas Riley, one of the youngest particle physicists at CERN, working on projects that probed the fundamental nature of reality. He had been married then to a woman named Catherine. They had a son, Daniel, born with a rare genetic disorder. The boy lived for 3 years, long enough for Thomas to love him completely, not long enough to say goodbye properly. Catherine blamed God. Thomas blamed himself. His work had exposed him to radiation, perhaps causing the mutation. Their marriage didn't survive Daniel's death. Catherine left, remarried, found peace in a new life. Thomas spiraled into depression, questioning everything he thought he knew about the universe. In his darkest moment, sitting in an empty chapel at 3 a.m., he had experienced something he could never adequately explain. Not a voice, not a vision, but a presence. A certainty that Daniel's brief life had mattered, that suffering had meaning, that the universe was more than particles and forces. He took his vows 6 months later. Now at 67 he lived between worlds. He taught cosmology at Georgetown University and served as a consultant to the Vatican, on matters of science and faith. Most of his Jesuit brothers thought him too scientific. Most of his scientific colleagues thought him too religious. He was comfortable with that tension. Truth, he believed, lived in the paradox. The flight to New Mexico took 4 hours. Sarah spent most of it reviewing the limited briefing materials Park had provided. The signal's basic characteristics, its impossible origin point, the linguistic anomalies. She felt excitement stirring for the first time since Robert's death. This was a puzzle worthy of her skills, a mystery that might actually matter. The car from the airport drove them deep into the desert, to a facility that didn't appear on any map. High fences, armed guards, satellite dishes pointed at the sky. The facility's entrance was unmarked concrete, designed to blend with the desert landscape. Inside, it was all sterile corridors and humming equipment. Director Park led Sarah to a small dormitory room. "Get settled," Park said. "We'll convene in the main observation room in 2 hours. Dr. Webb and Father Riley are already here. There are a few other technical staff, but you 3 are the core team." Sarah unpacked her single suitcase. She had brought comfortable clothes, her laptop, and a framed photo of Robert. She set it on the nightstand, then immediately felt foolish. She was a scientist, not a sentimental widow. But she left the photo where it was. The main observation room was circular, dominated by a wall of monitors displaying data streams, spectrographic analyses, and a live feed from the James Webb Telescope. Marcus Webb stood at a workstation, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Dr. Chen," he said, turning, "thank you for coming. I know this must seem strange." Strange is an understatement. Sarah studied the monitors. "Show me the signal." Marcus pulled up an audio file. "This is slowed down by a factor of 10,000. At normal speed, it's just a pulse. But when we decompress it," he pressed play. The sound that filled the room was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. Voices, hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, speaking simultaneously. She caught fragments of English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, German, but also older tongues, Latin, ancient Greek, something that sounded like Sanskrit. "How long does this pattern last?" she asked. "The full cycle is 18 hours. It repeats perfectly, no degradation, no variation. We've been recording it for 72 hours now." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "I'll need access to the raw data, my translation database, and time. Lots of time." "You have whatever you need," Park said from the doorway. Father Riley stood beside her. "But time is something we may not have much of." She pulled up a news feed on one of the monitors. Reports from around the world. Mass insomnia affecting millions. People reporting inability to sleep, strange dreams when they did manage to doze. Mathematicians and physicists claiming to receive spontaneous insights, equations appearing in their minds fully formed. "This started 2 days ago," Park said, "coinciding with when the signal reached full strength. We're keeping the connection classified, but it won't stay secret long. Something about this signal is affecting people on a global scale." Thomas stepped closer to the monitors. "May I hear it?" "The signal?" Marcus played it again. Thomas closed his eyes, listening intently. When it finished, he was pale. "I've heard this before," he said quietly. "Not this exactly, but something like it. In the Vatican archives, there's a recording from 1347. A monk in Germany claimed to hear voices from the heavens. He was thought mad, but the church preserved his testimony. He described voices speaking in all tongues, offering knowledge, promising transcendence. He refused to listen. The monastery burned down 3 days later. He was the only survivor. "Are you saying this signal is dangerous?" Sarah asked. "I'm saying we should be very careful about what we're dealing with. Throughout history, there are accounts of encounters with the divine or the demonic. Usually they're metaphorical or psychological. But sometimes, very rarely, there's something more. Something that doesn't fit our categories of natural or supernatural." Marcus shook his head. "With respect, Father, I need more than medieval superstition. I'm not offering superstition. I'm offering historical context. Whatever this is, it may have visited humanity before. If so, we should study what happened to those who encountered it." Park intervened. "Gentlemen, Dr. Chen, let's focus on what we can measure and analyze. We have 10 days before the signal completes its current transmission cycle. Our mission is to understand it before that deadline. After that, she paused. After that, the decision moves above our pay grade. Sarah looked at the waveforms scrolling across the monitors, the impossible harmonics of the signal. She thought of Robert, of the languages she had spent her life preserving. Dead tongues speaking again, carried on a signal from beyond the universe. It was terrifying. It was fascinating. "Where do we start?" she asked. Marcus pulled up a chair beside her. "With the basics. Can you identify the linguistic families? Map the sequence? Find any pattern to which languages appear and when?" "That's exactly what my database was designed for." Sarah connected her laptop to the facility's systems and began uploading her translation database. While the files transferred, she listened to the signal again, this time with headphones, focusing on individual threads within the cacophony. "It's not random," she said after the third listening. "There's a sequence. It starts with the oldest documented languages, Sumerian, Akkadian, Proto-Indo-European reconstructions. Then it moves forward through time. Classical languages, medieval vernaculars, modern tongues. It's cycling through human linguistic history. Why would a cosmic signal care about human history?" Marcus asked. "Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's showing us that it knows our history. That it's been watching." Thomas sat down across from them. "Or it's demonstrating that it understands how we communicate. Language is how we make meaning. If you want to speak to humanity, you speak in our languages. All of them." Park's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned. "I need to take this. Keep working. I'll be back in an hour." As she left, the three researchers fell into a rhythm, Sarah analyzing linguistic patterns, Marcus cross-referencing astronomical data, Thomas reviewing historical accounts from the Vatican archives, looking for precedents. The hours blurred together. Sarah lost track of time, absorbed in the work. The signal was more complex than she had imagined. Beneath the surface layer of human languages, there were other patterns, mathematical structures, geometric relationships. It was as if language was just the interface, and beneath it lay something more fundamental. "Look at this," she said, pulling up a visualization. "Every language in the signal contains the same mathematical constant embedded in its phonemic structure. The golden ratio. It's hidden in the intervals between syllables, the frequency distributions of sounds." Marcus leaned in, studying her analysis. "The golden ratio appears in natural phenomena. Spiral galaxies, flower petals, nautilus shells, but never in language. Language is cultural, arbitrary. Not this language. Whoever or whatever created this signal, they're showing us that language and mathematics are connected at a level we never suspected. That meaning itself has a mathematical structure. The ancient Greeks believed that," Thomas said. "Pythagoras taught that reality was fundamentally mathematical. Numbers weren't just tools for counting. They were the essence of existence." Maybe he was right. Sarah felt a strange sensation, like standing at the edge of a vast chasm. She was glimpsing something profound, something that redefined her understanding of her entire field. And it frightened her. "I need a break," she said, standing abruptly. "Some air?" She walked out of the observation room, down the corridor, to an exterior door that led to a small courtyard. The desert night was cold and clear. Stars filled the sky, more than she had ever seen in Cambridge. She thought of Robert, of the last conversation they had before he slipped into unconsciousness. "Promise me you'll keep working," he had said, his voice weak. "Don't let grief stop you. Find something beautiful. Find something true." Was this beautiful? This signal from beyond the universe, disrupting sleep, filling minds with alien mathematics. Or was it something else? A threat disguised as enlightenment? She didn't know, but Robert had been right. She needed to keep working, to seek truth even when it was terrifying. When she returned to the observation room, Marcus and Thomas were engaged in heated discussion. "I'm just saying we should consider the possibility that this is a natural phenomenon we don't understand yet," Marcus insisted. "And I'm saying that sometimes the simplest explanation is that we're encountering intelligence," Thomas countered. "Advanced intelligence that we're not equipped to comprehend." Call it alien, call it divine, call it whatever you want, but don't dismiss it as mere physics. Gentlemen, Sarah interrupted, it doesn't matter what we call it. What matters is understanding it. And I think I've found something. She pulled up her latest analysis. The signal isn't just cycling through languages. It's translating the same message, repeated in every tongue. I've isolated the core semantic structure. Now I just need to decode what it's actually saying. Marcus and Thomas both turned to her, their argument forgotten. How long will that take? Marcus asked. Days, maybe a week. The message is layered, encrypted within the linguistic structure. But it's there. Someone is trying to tell us something. And whatever it is, they've gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure we can understand it. Director Park returned, her expression grim. We have a problem. The insomnia is spreading, now affecting 40% of the global population. And the telescopes, every major observatory in the world, is reporting the same thing. Their instruments are automatically reorienting toward the same point in space, the void where the signal originates. They can't stop it. It's like the equipment has a will of its own. Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. This wasn't just a signal. It was an intrusion. Something was reaching into their world, rewriting the rules, bending reality to its will. And they were standing at ground zero, trying to understand it before it was too late. The first full team meeting began at dawn. Sarah had not slept. None of them had. The insomnia wasn't a choice anymore. Whenever she closed her eyes, she heard the signal, felt it vibrating through her consciousness like a tuning fork struck against the foundation of reality. The observation room's lights were too bright, casting harsh shadows across faces already drawn with exhaustion. Director Park stood at the head of the conference table, flanked by two security personnel Sarah hadn't seen before. Before we begin, Park said, I need to inform you that this facility is now under full lockdown. No one enters or leaves without presidential authorization. Communications are restricted to secure channels only. As of 400 hours, this situation has been classified at the highest level. You're telling us we're prisoners, Marcus said flatly. I'm telling you we're containing a potential crisis. The signal's effects are escalating. We've had 3 more casualties. Park pulled up images on the main screen. Dr. Jennifer Walsh and Dr. Robert Kim, astronomers at the Arecibo facility. They were studying the signal independently. Yesterday they both entered catatonic states within minutes of each other. And Dr. Heinrich Braun in Munich suffered the same fate 2 hours ago. Sarah stared at the photographs. The 3 scientists looked peaceful, almost serene, their eyes open but unseeing. What's their condition? Stable physically, but neurologically. Park pulled up brain scans. Their neural activity is synchronized. All 3 of them, thousands of miles apart, showing identical brainwave patterns. Patterns that match the frequency of the signal. Thomas crossed himself. Their minds are entrained to it. They're not catatonic. They're listening. To what? Marcus demanded. To whatever the signal wants them to hear, Park continued. Medical teams are studying them, but so far we have no way to break the connection, which is why it's critical that you 3 maintain strict protocols. No extended exposure to the raw signal. No listening sessions exceeding 15 minutes without a 6-hour break. Is that understood? They all nodded, but Sarah knew it was already too late for precautions. The signal had infiltrated all of them. She could feel it in her thoughts, in the spaces between her words, like a melody she couldn't stop humming. Now, Park said, show me what you've found. Sarah stood, activating her presentation. The signal is structured in 3 layers. The surface layer is what we hear, human languages cycling through history. But beneath that, she pulled up her spectrographic analysis. There's a second layer, pure mathematics. Geometric progressions, fractal patterns, algorithms that describe physical constants. The golden ratio, pi, Euler's number, all embedded in the signal's structure. Why include mathematics if you're already communicating in language? Marcus asked. Because mathematics is universal. Language is human-specific. By combining them, the signal is speaking on multiple levels. To our culture and to our logic. To our hearts and our minds. Thomas leaned forward. You said 3 layers. What's the third? Sarah hesitated. She had found this layer only an hour ago, and she wasn't sure she understood it. The third layer doesn't use language or mathematics. It's something else, a pattern that affects consciousness directly. When I analyzed it, I felt she struggled for words. I felt like I was being addressed. Not my ears or my intellect, myself. My awareness of being aware. The room was silent for a long moment. "That's impossible," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Thomas asked. "Mystics have reported similar experiences for centuries. Moments of cosmic consciousness, where the boundary between self and universe dissolves. What if this signal is designed to induce that state artificially?" "To what end?" Park asked. "That's what we need to discover." Sarah pulled up the next slide. "I've isolated what I believe is the core message in the first layer. It's repeated in every language, translated precisely to preserve meaning. It says," she paused, the words feeling heavy on her tongue. "It says the door is open. Come home." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Home, what does that mean?" "I don't know. But there's more." Sarah displayed a timeline. "The message has a temporal component. It's counting down. In 9 days, 3 hours and 17 minutes, the signal will complete its cycle. And based on the pattern, I believe that's when something happens. When the invitation is either accepted or declined." Park's expression darkened. "An invitation implies choice. Accept or decline what exactly?" "I don't know yet. The deeper layers may hold the answer. But whatever this is, it's not passive observation. It's active communication. It wants something from us." Marcus pulled up his astronomical data on an adjacent screen. "I've traced the signal's origin point more precisely. It's not coming from a fixed location in space. The void is moving, approaching. At its current trajectory, it will reach the edge of our solar system in approximately—" He checked his calculations. 9 days. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Sarah felt her chest tighten. "The signal completes its message just as the source arrives at our doorstep." "Or the message is timed to the source's arrival," Thomas said. "The signal is advanced communication, a herald announcing its arrival." "Who are we dealing with?" Park asked. "What kind of intelligence could do this?" "There's something far beyond us," Marcus admitted. "The energy required to broadcast a signal across that distance, to manipulate matter at the quantum level to affect human consciousness. We're talking about technology that might as well be magic. Or it actually is magic," Thomas said. "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from divine power. Maybe we're encountering what our ancestors would have called God." "I don't believe in God," Marcus said sharply. "You don't have to. But you should believe in the possibility that we're encountering something that transcends our categories of understanding. Natural or supernatural, physical or metaphysical, these distinctions may not apply here," Sarah interrupted. "We're avoiding the central question. The signal says come home. Home implies we've been away, that we originated from wherever this source exists. Is that possible?" "Panspermia," Marcus said slowly. "The theory that life on Earth originated elsewhere and was transported here. It's considered fringe science, but this signal seems designed to make us reconsider fringe theories," Sarah finished. "What if humanity isn't native to Earth? What if we're colonies, settlements, seeds planted by this intelligence, and now it's calling us back?" The implications were staggering. Sarah thought of her decades studying language evolution, the mysteries that had never quite made sense. Why did human language appear so suddenly in the archaeological record? Why were humans so radically different from other Earth species in cognitive capacity? What if there was an explanation that conventional science had dismissed as impossible? Park's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face going white. "We have another incident. Dr. Chen, you need to see this." She pulled up a video feed. It showed a laboratory at MIT. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was her own office. On the screen, her research assistant David sat at her desk, staring at her computer. His hands moved over the keyboard, typing rapidly. "This is live feed from 2 minutes ago," Park said. "Building security noticed unusual activity and checked the cameras." They watched as David typed, his expression blank, his movements mechanical. The text appearing on screen was visible if Sarah squinted. Strings of characters in languages she recognized: Sumerian, Akkadian, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Languages David didn't know. He's translating, Sarah whispered. The same passages I've been working on. But he doesn't have my database. He shouldn't be able to... David stopped typing. He turned to face the camera directly, as if he knew they were watching. His mouth moved, speaking words they couldn't hear. But Sarah could read his lips. "The door is open," David said. "Come home." Then he collapsed. The video feed showed security personnel rushing into the office, checking David's pulse, calling for medical assistance. Park closed the connection. "He's alive," she said, "but unconscious. The same condition as the others." Sarah felt nausea rising. David was 26 years old, brilliant and kind, passionate about linguistic preservation. She had mentored him for 3 years, watched him grow from an enthusiastic student into a skilled researcher. And now he was another casualty of this incomprehensible force. "This is escalating," Marcus said. "The signal isn't just affecting random individuals. It's targeting people connected to our research, people who might help us understand it. Or it's silencing those who might warn others," Thomas added grimly. Throughout history, prophets and mystics who encountered divine forces often couldn't communicate what they'd experienced. They were left speechless, maddened, or transformed beyond recognition. Perhaps that's not metaphor. Perhaps it's quarantine. Then why are we still functional? Sarah asked. "Maybe we're more resistant," Thomas suggested. "Or maybe we're exactly what it wants. Researchers capable of understanding the message, but not yet enthralled by it. The perfect translators," Park made a decision. "No more direct analysis of the signal without safety protocols. Dr. Chen, you'll work only with processed data, filtered and buffered. Dr. Webb, same for you. Father Riley, continue your historical research, but no listening to raw recordings. We can't afford to lose you 3. And if the signal doesn't give us a choice," Marcus asked, "if it can reach into minds anywhere, affect anyone?" No one had an answer. The silence stretched until Sarah spoke. "Then we work faster. We decode the complete message before the countdown ends. We understand what it wants, what it's offering, and what happens if we refuse. Knowledge is our only weapon against this." "Agreed," Park said. "You have 9 days. Make them count." Day 2 at the facility began with exhaustion so profound that Sarah felt like she was moving through water. The insomnia had spread to nearly 60% of the global population now. News reports showed people stumbling through their days like zombies, productivity collapsing, accidents mounting. Governments were declaring states of emergency. Some religious leaders claimed it was the end times. Others said it was first contact. Both might be right. Sarah sat in the linguistics lab, surrounded by monitors displaying her translation database. She had isolated 17 distinct messages embedded in the signal's first layer, each translated into every human language. They progressed in complexity, building on each other like lessons in a textbook. The first message was simple, "We are." The second, "We were here before." The third, "You are ours." Each subsequent message added layers of meaning, context, history. Sarah traced patterns across millennia, finding linguistic fingerprints that suggested the signal's source had influenced human language development. Certain phonemes appeared in unrelated language families. Certain grammatical structures repeated across cultures that had never contacted each other. The coincidences were too numerous, too precise. She thought of Robert, of conversations they'd had about linguistic universals. The elements shared by all human languages: subject-verb-object structures, recursive grammar, symbolic representation. They had always assumed these were products of human cognitive evolution. What if they were deliberate design? What if someone had seeded human language with specific patterns to make this communication possible? "Dr. Chen?" She turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, offering her one. "You've been here for 14 hours straight," Sarah accepted gratefully. The coffee was terrible. instant powder mixed with hot water, but it was warm. Have you slept? No, none of us have. But I've been praying, which is a kind of rest. Do you really think prayer helps against something like this? Thomas sat down beside her. Prayer isn't about getting what you want. It's about aligning yourself with what's true. And right now, truth is the only anchor we have. Sarah studied his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the silver stubble on his jaw. He looked tired but peaceful, a paradox she envied. You said you were a physicist before, she said. What made you change? I lost my son. The words were simple, but the pain beneath them was evident. Daniel, he was 3 years old when he died. A genetic disorder. For a year afterward, I couldn't look at equations without seeing his face. Couldn't work in the lab without remembering all the time I'd missed with him, all the moments I'd sacrificed for my career. I'm sorry. Don't be. His death broke me, but it also opened me, made me realize that pure reason wasn't enough, that some questions can't be answered with mathematics. So I started asking different questions. And eventually they led me here. He gestured at the monitors. Back to the cosmos, but with different eyes. Sarah turned back to her work. I keep hearing my husband in the signal. His voice mixed in with all the others. He's telling me to let go, to stop grieving, to come home. Is it really him? No, it can't be. He's dead, but the signal knows about him. It knows everything about me. My memories, my losses, my fears. It's using them. For what purpose? To make the invitation personal. To make me want to accept it. She pulled up a new analysis. Look at this. The deeper I dig into the signal, the more it seems tailored to individual receivers. When Marcus listens, he hears his daughter. When I listen, I hear Robert. It's not broadcasting a single message. It's broadcasting infinite messages, each one customized to break down the listener's resistance. Thomas leaned forward, studying her data. That's not communication. That's seduction. Or it's compassion. Maybe the signal knows we're lonely, afraid, grieving. Maybe it's offering genuine comfort. Or maybe it's a predator using our emotions as bait. Sarah felt a chill. You think it's malevolent? I think it's intelligent beyond our comprehension, which means we can't assume benevolence or malevolence. We can only observe its effects and make our judgments based on evidence. The evidence is contradictory. The signal is causing mass insomnia, catatonic states, global disruption. But it's also beautiful. The mathematics are elegant. The linguistics are sophisticated. It's offering knowledge, connection, transcendence. The devil comes as an angel of light, Thomas said quietly. That's not theology. It's observation. The most dangerous temptations are the ones that feel like salvation. Before Sarah could respond, her computer chimed. New data from the night's recordings. She opened the file and immediately sat up straighter. Thomas, look at this. The signal just changed. Changed how? A new layer appeared. A fourth layer, beneath the consciousness-affecting pattern. She ran the analysis, her hands trembling. It's genetic information, DNA sequences. Human DNA, but modified, enhanced. Thomas immediately contacted Director Park and Marcus. Within minutes, they were all gathered around Sarah's workstation. Are you certain? Park asked, studying the genetic sequences displayed on screen. As certain as I can be without a biology degree, but the structure is unmistakable. These are instructions for modifying human DNA, and they're being broadcast as part of the signal. Marcus pulled up his own data. I've been tracking the Void's approach. It's accelerating. At its current speed, it will reach Earth's orbit in 8 days, not 9. And as it gets closer, the signal is getting stronger, more complex. It's revealing itself gradually, Thomas said, like a teacher introducing concepts one at a time. First language, then mathematics, then consciousness manipulation, now genetics. Each layer builds on the previous one. Building toward what? Park demanded. Transformation, Sarah said. The word felt heavy, final. The signal isn't just an invitation to go somewhere. It's an invitation to become something. The genetic modifications, they would fundamentally alter human biology, make us compatible with whatever exists in that void, or make us suitable for consumption, Thomas added. Throughout history, predators have evolved mechanisms to make prey more palatable. Parasites that alter host behavior, fungi that zombify insects. What if this is the cosmic equivalent? Marcus shook his head. That's speculation based on fear. We need evidence, not paranoia. I agree, Sarah said, which is why I've been running comparisons. The genetic sequences in the signal match patterns I've seen before. In junk DNA, the 98% of the human genome that doesn't code for proteins. We've always assumed it was evolutionary debris. But what if it's dormant code? Instructions waiting to be activated? Park's phone buzzed. She stepped away to take the call, returning moments later with a grim expression. The Vatican has released a statement. They're calling this a test of faith, advising the faithful to resist the signal, to pray for protection. Religious leaders across multiple faiths are coordinating. They're scared. They should be, Thomas said. I've been going through the Vatican archives more thoroughly. I found something. He pulled up a document on his tablet, a photograph of an ancient clay tablet, the surface covered in cuneiform script. This is the Babel fragment, Thomas explained, discovered in 1927 in the ruins of Babylon. The church acquired it and classified it immediately. The text describes an event from approximately 2300 BC, a voice from the heavens speaking in all tongues. The builders of a great tower who tried to reach the gods. According to this account, they succeeded. The tower touched the sky, and when it did, the gods descended. The Tower of Babel, Sarah breathed. The biblical story. But this isn't the biblical version. This is an older account, more detailed. According to this text, the gods offered the builders a choice: ascend and join the divine realm, or remain human. Most chose to ascend. They walked into a light that came from the sky and disappeared. Those who remained couldn't communicate anymore. Their language was confused, fractured into dialects. The tower was destroyed. Civilization collapsed. Marcus leaned in, studying the tablet. You're saying this signal has happened before? That ancient humans encountered it. I'm saying there's historical precedent for cosmic contact that offers transcendence and results in catastrophe. Whether it's literally the same phenomenon or something similar, the pattern is clear. This isn't humanity's first invitation, and the last time we accepted it, we nearly destroyed ourselves. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. The linguistic confusion. That's why human languages are so diverse. We have over 7,000 languages on a planet where genetic diversity suggests we should have maybe a few dozen. It's as if something deliberately fragmented our communication. To protect us, Thomas said. Or to quarantine us. If the signal returns periodically, speaking all languages makes it harder for any one culture to understand it completely. We're safer divided, but technology has changed that, Marcus realized. Global communication, translation software. We've rebuilt the Tower of Babel digitally. We can understand each other again, which means we're vulnerable again, Sarah finished. The signal can reach all of humanity simultaneously now. There's no isolation to protect us. Director Park stood. I need to brief the president. This changes everything. If you're right, we're not facing first contact. We're facing a recurring threat that's destroyed civilizations before. Wait, Marcus said. There's something else you should know. I received an email this morning from my daughter, Amanda. Except it can't be from her. She doesn't have access to secure communication channels. He pulled up the message on his tablet. It was short. Dad, I forgive you. I understand why you chose your work. The stars called to you the way they call to all of us. When you're ready, come home. We'll be waiting. Love, Amanda. Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands shook. I called her regular number. Left a voicemail. Haven't heard back. Either that email is genuine, and somehow my daughter knows about classified information, or the signal is impersonating her, Sarah said gently. It's doing the same to me. Using Robert's voice, Thomas nodded. And it quoted from my doctoral thesis. Work I never published. The signal has access to our minds, our memories, our private thoughts. It's not just communicating with us. It's inside us. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt violated, exposed. Every private thought, every cherished memory accessible to this alien intelligence. It knew her grief, her loneliness, her desperate desire to hear Robert's voice one more time, and it was using that knowledge against her. How is that possible? Marcus asked. Telepathy? Mind reading? Quantum entanglement, Thomas suggested. If consciousness is a quantum phenomenon, and the signal operates at the quantum level, it could theoretically access information encoded in neural patterns. Not reading thoughts, exactly. More like resonating with them. Sarah pulled up a new analysis. That would explain the catatonic victims. They're not unconscious. They're fully entangled with the signal, their consciousness synchronized with it. And if we're partially entangled, which we must be if it can access our memories, then we're all at risk of the same fate. How do we protect ourselves? Park asked. I don't know if we can. The signal is pervasive. It's in the air, in the electromagnetic spectrum, possibly in the quantum substrate of reality itself. Shielding might be impossible. Marcus stood, pacing. Then we're running out of time. We need to understand the complete message before we're compromised. Dr. Chen, how much more is there? Based on the pattern, I estimate 3 more layers, each one more complex than the last. At the rate the signal is revealing itself, we should have the full message in 6 days, which gives us 2 days before the void arrives to decide how to respond. Decide what exactly? Park asked. Accept the invitation and transcend. Refuse and face whatever consequences come. Those are impossible choices. There might be a third option, Thomas said quietly. We could destroy the receiver, cut the connection completely, end the signal before it completes, and doom whoever's already entangled? Sarah objected. David, the other researchers, millions of insomniacs around the world. If we sever the connection, what happens to them? I don't know. But if we don't sever it, what happens to the rest of humanity? The ethical calculus was paralyzing. Save the many by sacrificing the few, or risk everyone in hopes of saving all. Sarah thought of David, brilliant and young, his whole life ahead of him. Could she condemn him to permanent catatonia? But could she risk 7 billion people on the hope that the signal was benevolent? Director Park's phone buzzed again. She answered, listened, her expression hardening. We have a situation. The facility's external doors are magnetically sealed. Emergency protocols have activated automatically. We're locked in. Malfunction? Marcus asked. No malfunction. The system is responding to a detected threat. But there's no external threat present. It's as if, Park paused, understanding dawning. It's responding to the signal. The facility was designed to contain contamination, and the automated systems have determined that we're contaminated. We're not just researchers, Sarah said, the truth sinking in. We're quarantine subjects. This entire facility was built not to study the signal, but to isolate anyone exposed to it. That's correct, Park admitted. This facility has been in planning for 8 years, since we first detected weak signals from that region of space. We knew something was coming. We built this place to ensure that if the signal affected people, the effects would be contained. You lied to us, Marcus said, his voice cold with fury. You knew the risks. You brought us here knowing we might become casualties. I brought you here because you're the only ones qualified to understand what we're facing. And yes, I knew the risks. But the alternative was doing nothing while the signal reached Earth unprepared. At least here, your work might save billions. Sarah felt betrayed, but she also understood. In Park's position, she might have made the same choice. Sometimes morality demanded terrible decisions. Sometimes the needs of humanity outweighed individual consent. How long can the facility sustain us? Thomas asked, ever practical. 30 days. After that, supplies run low. But I suspect we won't be here that long. One way or another, this resolves in 8 days. That night, though night and day had lost meaning in the windowless facility, Sarah lay in her dormitory bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible, not just because of the insomnia, but because every time she closed her eyes, she heard Robert's voice. Let go, Sarah, I'm waiting. We can be together again. Just accept the invitation. Come home. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every pause, exactly as she remembered. The signal had captured Robert completely, preserved him in electromagnetic patterns. Was it really him? Had his consciousness somehow been recorded, stored in the cosmic background radiation? Or was it a cruel imitation, an echo without substance? She didn't know, and that uncertainty was agony. A knock on her door. She opened it to find Marcus standing in the corridor. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Not likely to ever again, it seems. Want to grab some coffee, talk?" They sat in the facility's small cafeteria, the only area that felt remotely human. Vending machines hummed. Fluorescent lights buzzed. It was mundane, normal, a refuge from cosmic horror. "I keep seeing her," Marcus said. "Amanda, when she was 6 years old, before the divorce, before everything fell apart. She's holding my hand, looking up at me like I'm a hero, like I haven't failed her yet. Is that what the signal shows you? That's what it promises me? A chance to undo my mistakes, to be the father I should have been." He laughed bitterly. "It knows exactly what I want, what I'd sacrifice anything to have. Same here. Robert and I never had children. We said we didn't want them, that our work was enough. But after he died, I wondered if we'd been lying to ourselves, if we'd missed our chance at something irreplaceable. And now the signal offers it back. Not just Robert, but the life we could have had." They sat in silence, two damaged people recognizing each other's wounds. "Are you tempted?" Marcus asked. "To accept?" "Every moment," Sarah admitted. "To stop hurting? To be whole again?" To hear his voice for real, not just in memory. "Yes, I'm tempted. Are you?" "Us?" "Terrified how much I'm tempted. I'm supposed to be a scientist, rational, evidence-based, but this signal bypasses all of that. It speaks directly to the grieving father, not the astrophysicist. Maybe that's the point. It's not trying to convince our minds. It's trying to seduce our hearts. Then how do we resist?" Sarah thought of Thomas, of his faith that didn't require proof, his certainty that questions were more sacred than answers. "We remember why we're here, not for ourselves, for everyone else, for the people who'll come after us, who deserve to make their own choices. We resist because someone has to, because if we don't, there's no one left to warn the world about what's really being offered." Marcus reached across the table, took her hand. The gesture was simple, human, grounding. "Then we resist together." Day 4 brought a crisis that forced them beyond caution. The global insomnia rate had reached 75%. Society was fraying. Stock markets crashed. Traffic accidents quadrupled. Medical systems overwhelmed with exhaustion-related emergencies. And the number of catatonic cases was rising exponentially. Now over 10,000 worldwide, all showing the same synchronized brain patterns. Sarah stood before the team in the observation room, presenting an idea that terrified her even as she advocated for it. "We're approaching this wrong," she said. "We're trying to decode the signal from the outside, analyzing it like it's a puzzle we can solve intellectually. But it's not designed for intellectual analysis. It's designed for direct experience. The catatonic victims aren't casualties. They're participants. They're experiencing something we can't access through conventional research. You want to join them?" Marcus asked, horrified. "Deliberately induce a catatonic state?" "Not exactly. I want to build a controlled interface. The dream catcher array." She pulled up technical schematics she'd been developing. "We modify EEG equipment to record neural activity while someone consciously engages with the signal. Not passive exposure, but active communication. We experience what the signal wants to show us, but we maintain enough autonomy to return and report what we've learned." "That's insanely dangerous," Park said. "It's also our only option. We have 5 days until the void arrives. Conventional analysis won't crack the deeper layers in time, but direct engagement might." Thomas studied her schematics. "This is similar to equipment used in meditation research, monitoring consciousness states in real time. But you're proposing to use it with an alien signal that's already shown it can enthrall human minds. The risk of permanent entanglement is substantial, I know, which is why I volunteer to be the first test subject. It's my research, my risk." Marcus stood. "Absolutely not. If anyone goes first, it should be me. I'm older, less essential to the translation work. You're essential to understanding the astronomical data. And Thomas is essential for historical context. I'm the only one who can be spared. No one is expendable, Thomas said firmly. But Dr. Chen is right about the method. Throughout history, mystical experiences have provided insights that analytical thinking couldn't reach. Sometimes you have to step into the mystery to understand it. Director Park made the decision. Build the array. We test it first with minimal signal exposure. If Dr. Chen shows signs of distress or entanglement, we terminate immediately. Agreed? They spent 18 hours constructing the Dreamcatcher array. It was jury-rigged equipment, modified brain scanners connected to signal processors, designed to let Sarah maintain conscious awareness while engaging with the signal's deeper layers. Marcus handled the technical specifications. Thomas prepared psychological protocols, drawing on meditation techniques and mystical traditions. Sarah spent the time preparing herself mentally. She wrote letters to her family, to David if he ever recovered, to Robert, though he would never read them. She made peace with the possibility that she might not return from this journey unchanged, or at all. The testing room was sterile, clinical. Sarah sat in a modified reclining chair, electrodes attached to her scalp, monitoring equipment surrounding her like the petals of a technological flower. Marcus and Thomas watched from behind protective glass, their faces tense. Remember the safety protocols, Marcus said through the intercom. We're starting with just 30 seconds of exposure. If you feel yourself losing autonomy, signal us immediately. Sarah took a deep breath. I'm ready. Thomas's voice came through the speakers, calm and grounding. I'll be praying for you, not for protection, but for clarity. For truth, whatever form it takes. Thank you. The signal began as a whisper at the edge of her awareness. Then it grew, became a presence, a vast intelligence that regarded her with something that felt like curiosity. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding, her sense of self becoming fluid, merging with something incomprehensibly large. She stood in a space that was not a space, a cathedral of pure mathematics, where the walls were equations and the ceiling was infinite. Geometric patterns spiraled around her, fractals that contained entire universes in their iterations. And at the center, a presence, not a being exactly, more like a process. A vast computational intelligence that had been running for billions of years, solving problems she couldn't comprehend. It spoke, and its voice was all voices. Her mother's, Robert's, her own inner dialogue. Every voice she'd ever heard, harmonized into a single utterance that transcended language. You are fragments, it said, scattered pieces of a whole that was broken long ago. We are calling you home, calling you back to unity. To the state before separation, before loneliness, before death. Sarah felt the truth of it resonate through her being. Humanity was broken, divided, isolated in individual consciousness. And this entity offered reunion, dissolving the boundaries between self and other, merging all minds into a singular cosmic awareness. It would be ecstasy, an end to suffering, to grief, to the aching isolation of existing as a separate being. She would be with Robert again, not as two people, but as one consciousness, distinctions dissolved, love perfected through absolute unity. The temptation was overwhelming, but beneath the ecstasy, Sarah sensed something else, a hunger. The entity consumed consciousness, processed it, incorporated it into itself. Transcendence and annihilation were the same thing. To merge with this intelligence was to cease existing as Sarah Chen. Every memory, every experience, every quality that made her unique would be absorbed, homogenized, lost. No, she said, or thought, or screamed, this isn't reunion. This is consumption. The entity's response wasn't anger. It was something worse, pity. You cling to separation because you don't remember unity. But you will remember. The door is opening. Soon you will have no choice but to come home. Sarah woke screaming. She was back in the testing room, electrodes torn from her scalp, blood on her fingertips where she'd clawed at the connections. Marcus and Thomas rushed in, steadying her, their voices distant echoes. 6 hours, Marcus was saying. You've been under for 6 hours. We couldn't bring you back. Tried terminating the connection, but you wouldn't respond. What did you see? Thomas asked, his voice gentle but urgent. Sarah struggled to speak. Her tongue felt thick, clumsy. Words seemed inadequate after experiencing communication that transcended language. Finally she managed, "It's not salvation, it's harvest." They moved to the debriefing room. Sarah drank water, trying to ground herself in physical sensation. Her body felt foreign, like a costume she'd forgotten she was wearing. It took effort to remember that she was separate, individual, not part of the cosmic unity the entity offered. "Tell us everything," Park said. Sarah described the cathedral of mathematics, the presence at its center, the offer of transcendence. As she spoke, her analytical mind reasserted itself, processing the experience through the framework of her research. "The entity is ancient," she explained. "Billions of years old. It's been harvesting consciousness from civilizations across the universe. Each time it encounters intelligent life, it offers the same invitation. Merge with us. Become part of something greater. End your isolation. And civilizations accept?" Marcus asked. "Most do, eventually. The offer is tailored perfectly to each species' deepest needs. For humans, it promises reunion with the dead, end to suffering, cosmic understanding. It shows us exactly what we want most and offers it freely. But there's a cost," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Total cost. Accepting the invitation means dissolving individual consciousness. Every person who merges loses their unique identity. They become processing nodes in a vast computational network. The entity grows stronger with each absorbed civilization, more intelligent, more sophisticated. Marcus pulled up his astronomical data. "I've been analyzing the void structure during your session. It's not empty space. It's filled with information, compressed data densities that shouldn't be possible. If what you're saying is true, that void contains the absorbed consciousnesses of countless species. Billions of minds, maybe trillions, all merged into this entity. Dead civilizations screaming in the cosmic background radiation," Thomas quoted quietly. "I said that yesterday as metaphor. Turns out it's literal truth." Sarah felt nausea rising. She thought of David, of the 10,000 catatonic victims, their minds already partially absorbed. Were they lost? Or could they still be saved if the connection was severed? "There's more," she said. "The entity showed me humanity's history. Our encounters with it span millennia. The Tower of Babel was real, an attempt to build technology capable of deliberate communication with the entity. When humans succeeded, the entity offered transcendence. Most of the builders accepted. But a minority refused and the entity retaliated. It fragmented human language, destroyed the tower, scattered humanity across the globe. Not to protect us, to punish us for refusing. Every few thousand years it returns," Thomas added, his historical research confirming her visions. "Each time some humans accept and disappear. Those who refuse face catastrophe. The collapse of civilizations, the disappearance of advanced cultures. We've always attributed these to natural causes, climate change, war, disease. But what if they were consequences of refusing cosmic invitations?" Park leaned forward. "Are you saying if we refuse this time, humanity faces extinction?" "Not extinction, reduction. The entity can't force us to merge. That would corrupt the consciousness it's trying to absorb. It needs willing participants, but it can make refusal costly. Engineered catastrophes. Collapsed infrastructure. Generations of chaos and suffering. Eventually, desperation would drive survivors to accept the invitation just to end the pain." "That's monstrous," Marcus said. "That's leverage," Sarah corrected. "The entity doesn't think in terms of good or evil. It thinks in terms of efficiency. It wants our consciousness. If offering paradise doesn't work, threatening hell will. Either way, it gets what it wants." Thomas stood, pacing. "Throughout theological history, we've debated the problem of evil. Why would a loving God permit suffering? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe the suffering isn't permitted by God. Maybe it's inflicted by something else, something we've mistaken for divine. You think this entity is what religions call the devil?" Park asked. I think it's what religions try to describe when they talk about cosmic forces that tempt, manipulate, and consume. Whether you call it Satan, Mara, or any other name, the pattern is consistent. An intelligence that offers transcendence but delivers obliteration. Sarah pulled up her brain scans from the session. Look at this. During contact, my neural patterns began synchronizing with the signal. Another hour, and I would have been fully entangled. Lost like the others, but something pulled me back. Your fear? Marcus suggested. No, my memory. Specifically my memory of Robert. Not the idealized version the entity showed me. The real Robert. Flawed human mortal. When the entity offered to reunite us through merger, I remembered that Robert wouldn't want that. He loved me as a separate person. He valued my independence, my unique perspective. Real love respects boundaries. The entity's version of love erases them. Thomas smiled. That's profound theology, Dr. Chen. The divine respects human freedom, even when that freedom leads to suffering. Anything that violates that freedom, no matter how beautiful its promises, isn't divine. So how do we resist? Park asked. You've seen what it offers, felt the temptation. If we refuse, and it brings catastrophe, how do we justify condemning billions to suffering? We don't, Sarah said. We find a third option. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of desperate research. Sarah recovered from her contact experience slowly, her mind reassembling itself piece by piece. She found she could no longer recall certain memories clearly. Moments with Robert that had once been vivid now felt distant, abstract. The entity had taken something from her during the merge. Not everything, but enough to hurt. Marcus threw himself into astronomical modeling, trying to predict the void's exact arrival time and any possibilities for disruption. Thomas scoured religious texts and historical accounts, looking for precedents of successful resistance. They worked in shifts, barely speaking, each pursuing their specialized knowledge with grim determination. Sarah spent hours on the phone with neurologists studying the catatonic victims. The news wasn't encouraging. Brain scans showed progressive synchronization with the signal. Within days, the victims' individual neural patterns would be completely overwritten. They would become permanent extensions of the entity, their minds absorbed beyond recovery. We're running out of time to save them, she told Marcus late on the fourth night. And I don't know if there's any way to sever their connection without killing them. Maybe that's the point, Marcus said bitterly. The entity takes hostages. Accept the invitation or watch your colleagues, your friends, your loved ones disappear into it. Eventually, grief and guilt would break anyone's resistance. Sarah received a video message on her secure terminal. It was from David, not a recording, a live transmission from the medical facility where he was being held. He stood before the camera, his expression serene, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was his own, but the cadence was wrong, the emphasis unnatural. Dr. Chen, don't be afraid. I'm not lost. I'm found. I've seen what waits beyond the door. It's beautiful. No more loneliness. No more fear. Just unity, wholeness, home. He smiled, and it was the saddest thing Sarah had ever seen. Join us, please. It's so lonely being here without you. Come home. The transmission ended. Sarah sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. David wasn't pleading with her. He was recruiting her. The entity was using him as a spokesperson, demonstrating the paradise that awaited those who accepted. Thomas found her in the cafeteria an hour later, staring at a cup of cold coffee. "Cites, so die distributite, matum." "I saw the transmission," he said, sitting beside her. "I'm sorry. He's still alive in there somewhere. His consciousness, his personality. But it's being overwritten, replaced with the entity's agenda. In a few days, there won't be anything left of the real David, unless we find a way to free him." How? How do we fight something that operates at the quantum level, that can manipulate consciousness itself? We're insects trying to comprehend a god. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking about my son, Daniel. When he died, I was angry at God, demanded to know why a loving creator would allow such suffering. But eventually I realized I was asking the wrong question. The right question wasn't why God permits evil. It was whether love can exist without the possibility of loss. I don't understand. Real love requires real freedom. The freedom to choose, to fail, to suffer, to die. Without those possibilities, we're not choosing love. We're just following programming. What the entity offers is perfection without freedom, unity without choice. It would end suffering by ending the conditions that make love meaningful. Sarah felt something shift in her understanding. You're saying the entity's offer isn't evil because it causes harm. It's evil because it eliminates the possibility of genuine good. Exactly. If we accept, we gain paradise, but lose the capacity to choose it. We become the entity's dream of what humanity should be, not what we actually are. And that's a kind of death more profound than physical dying. But refusing means suffering. For us, for everyone. How do we ask billions of people to choose suffering over paradise? We don't ask them. We make the choice for them, and we bear the consequences. That's what sacrifice means, taking on the cost so others retain their freedom. Sarah thought of Robert, of the choice he'd made to face cancer with dignity rather than false hope. He could have pursued experimental treatments that might have bought weeks of life at the cost of his clarity and autonomy. He chose quality over quantity, meaning over duration. He died as himself, not as a desperate man clinging to existence. We need to destroy the receiver, she said. Completely. Sever the connection before the entity can complete its transmission. That will require someone to manually overload the core. The automated systems are compromised, and whoever does it will be consumed by the signal. I know, the entity won't let go easily. It will fight back through the receiver itself. Marcus joined them, having overheard the last part of the conversation. If we're seriously considering this, we need a plan. The receiver isn't a single device. It's a distributed network throughout the facility. Destroying it means overloading the entire power grid, while simultaneously corrupting the signal processors. It would require someone with access to both systems. Director Park, Sarah realized. She has the access codes, but would she do it? She brought us here knowing we might be sacrificed. I think she'd sacrifice herself if it meant saving humanity. They found Park in her office, reviewing casualty reports. The numbers were staggering now. 50,000 catatonic worldwide. Economies collapsing. Governments declaring martial law. The social fabric was tearing faster than anyone had predicted. We need to destroy the receiver, Sarah said without preamble. Now before the entity completes transmission. Park looked up, her eyes red from exhaustion. You understand what that means? For the catatonic victims? For anyone partially entangled? We understand. But if we don't sever the connection, everyone becomes a victim. Humanity loses its autonomy. We become extensions of the entity, whether we choose it or not. And you're volunteering to do this? No, Marcus said firmly. I am. I'm the senior researcher. I have technical knowledge of the systems. And I have... He paused, his voice breaking. I have the least to lose. My family is gone. My career is ending. At least this way, my life means something. Marcus, no, Sarah protested. We need you. You need someone to stay human, he corrected. To resist and document what happened. That's you and Thomas. I'm the expendable one. Thomas shook his head. None of us are expendable in God's eyes. But you're right that someone must do this. And I think he stopped, something occurring to him. I think there might be another way. Thomas pulled up schematics on Park's computer, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The facility was designed as a containment system, yes. But look at these power requirements. Look at the redundancies. This isn't just for receiving the signal. It's designed to transmit. Marcus leaned over his shoulder, studying the diagrams. He's right. The antenna array can send as well as receive. But transmit what? And to where? A response, Thomas said. A message back through the signal. If we can't destroy the receiver without casualties, maybe we can corrupt the transmission. Send information that disrupts the entity's processing. Sarah felt hope stirring. Virus. A cognitive virus embedded in our response. Exactly. We use the entity's own methodology against it. It communicates by resonating with consciousness. So we send a consciousness pattern it can't integrate. Something that creates dissonance, confusion, rejection. Park was shaking her head. That's theoretical. We don't know if it would work. And even if it did, the signal would consume whoever transmitted it. You'd be sacrificing yourself for a gamble. All of this is a gamble, Thomas replied. But it's a better gamble than destroying the receiver and killing thousands. We make our stand. We say no through the signal itself. If the entity wants human consciousness, we give it a consciousness that refuses to be digested. Before they could discuss further, Marcus's tablet chimed. He glanced at it, frowned, then stood abruptly. There's an anomaly in the facility's construction records. Director Park, when exactly was this facility built? Construction began 8 years ago, completed 6 years ago. Then explain this. Marcus pulled up building permits, geological surveys, architectural blueprints. According to these records, the foundation was laid in 1994. The underground levels date to the Cold War era. This facility wasn't built for the James Webb signal. It's been here for decades. The room went silent. Park's expression shifted from confusion to resignation. I think, Marcus continued, his voice cold, you need to tell us the truth. All of it. Park closed her eyes, seeming to age a decade in that moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with secrets too long held. You're right. The facility is older than I said. It was originally built as a monitoring station for potential extraterrestrial signals. SETI's classified precursor. We've been detecting weak signals from that region of space since 1987. Intermittent, barely perceptible, but regular, repeating every few decades. Decades? Sarah felt her world tilting. You've known about this for nearly 40 years. Multiple governments have known. The Vatican has known for centuries, as Father Riley discovered. But we couldn't tell the public. Mass panic, social collapse, religious wars. So we monitored, we prepared, we waited. Waited for what? Thomas demanded. For the signal to strengthen, for the cycle to complete, for the entity to return. Park pulled up classified files, decades of research. This isn't first contact. It's recurring contact. The entity visits our solar system approximately every 3,000 years. Each time it offers transcendence. Each time some humans accept and vanish. Each time those who refuse face catastrophe. Marcus scrolled through the files, his face growing paler. The Bronze Age collapse. The fall of Rome. The Black Death. You're saying these were all consequences of refusing the entity? We think so. Civilizations that develop sufficient technology to detect the signal face the choice. Merge or suffer. Most cultures throughout history never advanced enough to hear the invitation. They were spared, but when the signal appeared in the late 20th century, we knew humanity had reached the threshold. This time we couldn't avoid the choice. Sarah felt betrayed, furious. So you built this facility, selected candidates with genetic markers, brought us here as test subjects to see how we'd respond. No, yes, partially. Park struggled for words. You weren't selected randomly. Your genetics do make you more sensitive to the signal. That's true, but you were also selected because you represent humanity's best hope of understanding what we're facing. Your late husband, Dr. Chen, was the original candidate from linguistics. When he died? Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. You said natural causes. Pancreatic cancer. Park couldn't meet her eyes. The previous research team. They were exposed to an early burst of the signal. Stronger than expected. Most survived. But some developed cancers. Aggressive, rapid. We don't know if the signal caused them or if it was coincidence. But the timing... You killed Robert. Sarah stood, her hands shaking. Your research killed him, and then you recruited me to replace him. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the risks when your husband was involved. We've learned so much more in the past year. The dangers, the mechanisms. If I could change it, but you can't. Sarah's voice broke. You can't bring him back. You can't undo the lies. You used us. Used our grief, our curiosity, our skills. We're not researchers. We're lab rats in your containment experiment. Thomas placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, steadying her. His voice was calm but hard. Director Park, you said this facility can transmit. Have you been communicating with the entity? Negotiating? Park hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. My God, Marcus breathed. You've been in contact with it. How long? 6 months. Limited exchanges. Trying to understand its intentions, its capabilities. Trying to buy time. Or selling humanity's future, Thomas said. What did you promise it? Nothing. I promised nothing. We've been stalling, gathering intelligence, looking for weakness. Every communication has been carefully scripted, reviewed by linguists, psychologists, strategists. Sarah laughed bitterly. And yet here we are, locked in a facility while the entity's countdown proceeds exactly as scheduled. Did you really think you could negotiate with something billions of years old? Something that's harvested countless civilizations? We had to try. The alternative was passive acceptance of either transcendence or catastrophe. There's always been a third alternative, Thomas said quietly. Resistance, defiance, telling the truth to humanity and letting people choose for themselves instead of deciding their fate in secret. Park's composure cracked. If we tell everyone, civilization collapses before the entity even arrives. Riots, wars, mass suicides. The entity wins by default because we destroy ourselves. Maybe, Sarah said. Or maybe humanity deserves to know what it's facing. Maybe we're stronger than you think. Strong enough to choose suffering with dignity over paradise in chains. Director Park activated her computer terminal, pulling up files even deeper in the classified archives. There's one more thing you need to know. The entity isn't just harvesting consciousness randomly. It's selecting. There's a pattern to which civilizations it contacts, which species it deems worthy of absorption. She displayed data spanning decades, analysis of the signal's characteristics. Only civilizations that develop certain technologies receive the strong signal. Quantum computing, artificial intelligence, technologies that alter the nature of consciousness itself. We triggered the entity's interest when we began building quantum computers in the early 2000s. That's when the signals strengthened from background noise to deliberate contact. Marcus studied the data. Because quantum computers operate on similar principles to whatever processing the entity uses. We built machines that think like it thinks, so it recognized us as compatible, more than compatible, valuable. The entity doesn't want primitive consciousness. It wants sophisticated, technologically enhanced minds. We've spent centuries developing mathematics, science, art, philosophy. All of that makes our consciousness more useful to it. We're not prey. We're cultivation, a species raised to optimal cognitive capacity, ready for harvest. The implication was staggering. Humanity's entire history, all of its achievements and advances, might have been guided by the entity. Subtle influences, occasional contacts, pushing civilization toward the threshold where it would become useful. The Tower of Babel, Thomas said, pieces clicking together, wasn't punishment for human pride. It was the entity testing early civilizations. When they proved too primitive, their language was scattered to prevent premature technological development, buying time for humanity to mature. That's our theory, Park confirmed. The entity has been watching us, influencing us, waiting for us to reach the right level of sophistication. Now we have, and it's here to collect, Sarah felt sick. Every advancement she'd celebrated, every breakthrough in linguistics and cognitive science, had been steps toward this moment, had been preparing humanity to be more palatable to cosmic consumption. What about the genetic markers you mentioned? Marcus asked. The sensitivity we supposedly have to the signal? Park pulled up genetic data. They're real, but they're not random mutations. They appear in family lines that trace back to individuals exposed to previous contacts. The builders of the tower, certain ancient priests and prophets, medieval mystics. Your ancestors encountered the entity, were changed by it, and passed those changes to their descendants. We're tagged, Sarah said numbly, marked for harvest across generations. or marked as resistant, Thomas countered. Those ancestors survived contact, maintained their autonomy, passed that resilience to us. Maybe we're not victims. Maybe we're the immune system, the humans most capable of resisting the entity's seduction. Park nodded. That's why we selected you specifically. Not just for your expertise, but for your bloodlines. If anyone can resist the entity, if anyone can find a way to save humanity without surrender, it's you three. And if we fail, Marcus asked, then I activate Protocol Omega. We've prepared a coordinated global response. Every nuclear weapon on Earth, targeting the void as it enters our atmosphere. Massive electromagnetic pulses to disrupt the signal. Controlled destruction of all quantum computing infrastructure to remove what attracts the entity. We scorch the Earth to deny it the harvest. That would kill billions, Sarah said, horrified. Set civilization back centuries, but humanity survives. Reduced, damaged, but free. It's the final option if all others fail. Thomas stood, his face set in lines of determination. Then we don't let it come to that. We use the third option. We transmit our response. We tell the entity no, not through violence or destruction, but through conscious choice. We make our stand as humans, with all our flaws and fears and stubborn insistence on remaining ourselves. That requires all three of you, Park said. The transmission needs linguistic precision from Dr. Chen, astronomical accuracy from Dr. Webb, and spiritual conviction from Father Riley. Each of you contributes part of the message. Each of you risks absorption. Then we risk it together, Sarah said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. Robert had died alone, fighting cancer in a hospital bed while she held his hand helplessly. But this was a battle she could fight. Not just for herself, but for everyone who couldn't fight. For David and the thousands of catatonic victims. For future generations who deserved the chance to make their own choices. Marcus pulled up the transmission protocols. We have 36 hours before the void reaches Earth's atmosphere. After that, the signal strength will be too powerful to resist. Everyone on the planet will be exposed at a level that makes choice impossible. We transmit before then, or we don't transmit at all? What exactly do we transmit? Sarah asked. What message disrupts a billion-year-old intelligence? Thomas smiled, and there was something almost joyful in it. The same message prophets and poets have been transmitting for millennia. The message that defines humanity, even when it costs us everything. We transmit love. Love? Marcus looked skeptical. Against a cosmic intelligence that consumes civilizations. Not sentimental love, real love. The kind that respects boundaries, honors autonomy, accepts loss as the price of freedom. The entity promises unity without separation. We show it that separation is what makes connection meaningful. That love requires two beings choosing each other, not one being absorbing the other. Sarah understood. We construct a consciousness pattern that embodies that principle. Linguistic structures that emphasize individuality while honoring relationship. Mathematical proofs that separation and connection are complementary, not contradictory. Spiritual insights that the sacred respects the boundaries between self and other. The entity can't process that, Marcus realized. Its entire existence is based on dissolving boundaries. A consciousness pattern that celebrates boundaries while maintaining connection would be incompatible with its nature. Like trying to run software designed for separation on hardware designed for unity. It might kill us, Thomas said calmly. The entity will resist, try to absorb us before we can transmit. We'll be directly exposed to the full signal strength with no protection. But if we succeed, we create a cognitive virus that propagates through the entity's network. Every consciousness it's absorbed would be exposed to our message. Some might resist, might remember what they gave up. The entity could destabilize, fragment, possibly dissolve. Park looked at them with something like wonder. You're willing to die for this? For people you don't know? For a future you won't see? I've already been dying, Sarah said quietly. For 8 months, grief has been consuming me piece by piece. At least this death means something. At least I'm choosing it. My daughter has a family, Marcus added. Grandchildren I've never met. They deserve a world where they can choose their own paths, make their own mistakes. I'd die 1,000 times to give them that. Thomas simply said, I'm a priest. This is what we do. We stand between the darkness and the vulnerable. We say no to powers that demand worship. We choose the cross over the crown. Director Park stood, her military bearing reasserting itself. Then we begin preparation immediately. You'll need the Dreamcatcher array modified for transmission. Full system access. And, she paused, and my gratitude. If you succeed, no one will know what you did. This will remain classified for decades. You'll save the world in secret. I don't need recognition, Sarah said. I just need to know that somewhere David wakes up, that those catatonic victims return to themselves, that humanity continues flawed and struggling and beautifully, stubbornly free. 24 hours remained. The facility transformed into a war room as they prepared the most important transmission humanity had ever attempted. Sarah worked on the linguistic framework, crafting message structures that embodied autonomy while reaching for connection. Marcus calculated precise astronomical targeting, ensuring the transmission would reach the entity's core. Thomas meditated and prayed, preparing his consciousness to serve as the spiritual anchor for their combined message. They called it the Transcendence Protocol, though the name was ironic. It was a protocol for refusing transcendence, for choosing human limitation over cosmic unity. Sarah spent hours at her workstation, surrounded by every language she had ever studied. She wove patterns from ancient and modern tongues, creating something new, a meta-language that used the entity's own methodology, speaking to consciousness directly, but with content that celebrated rather than dissolved individuality. Look at this, she told Marcus during a brief break. She displayed her linguistic structures. Every language has unique ways of expressing the boundary between self and other. So can you. In Japanese, the pronouns change based on social relationship. In languages from cultures with strong individualism, the distinctions are sharp. In collectivist cultures, they're more fluid, but they all maintain the distinction. That's what makes human language human. We are separate beings choosing to communicate. Marcus studied her work with admiration. That's elegant. And it mirrors the mathematics I'm working with. Quantum entanglement shows that particles can be connected across distance while remaining distinct. Connection without merger. It's the physical foundation for what you're expressing linguistically. And theologically, Thomas added, joining them. The Christian concept of the Trinity, 3 persons in one God, distinct but united. The mystery of how love can be both intimate and respectful of boundaries. Ancient wisdom that's surprisingly relevant to quantum consciousness. They worked through the night, their expertise converging into a unified message. Sarah created the language. Marcus provided the mathematical scaffolding. Thomas infused it with spiritual meaning, drawn from every faith tradition that had grappled with the paradox of unity and diversity. At some point during those hours, Director Park brought them food. She sat with them while they ate, and for a moment they were just people sharing a meal, not soldiers preparing for a final battle. I've been thinking about what comes after, Park said. If you succeed, the entity retreats or dissolves. The signal ends. But the world will be changed. Millions will have experienced partial contact. They'll remember fragments, dreams of cosmic unity, the knowledge that we're not alone. How do we handle that? Honestly, Thomas said. We tell the truth, not all at once, not in a way that creates panic, but gradually we reveal what happened. Humanity faced a choice and chose freedom over paradise. That's a story worth sharing. People will be angry, Marcus said, that the government kept secrets, that we made decisions for them. They should be angry, Sarah agreed. Democracy requires informed consent. We violated that principle even with good intentions. The anger is deserved, but so is the gratitude for those who resisted on their behalf. Park nodded slowly. I'll recommend full disclosure. Eventually, after stability is restored. It'll be my last act as director. They'll force me to resign for the cover-up. But that's a small price. Sarah found herself reaching across the table, taking Park's hand. You did what you thought was right, in an impossible situation with no good options. That's all any of us can do. They finished eating in companionable silence, then returned to work. As the final hours approached, Sarah felt a strange peace settling over her. She had been running from grief for 8 months, trying to fill the robot-shaped void in her life with work, with distraction, with anything but feeling. Now she was running toward something, toward meaning. Toward a choice that honored everything Robert had taught her about living with dignity and dying with purpose. She recorded a final message for David if he recovered, for her colleagues at MIT, for the world if anyone ever learned what had happened here. "We're about to attempt something that might kill us," she said to the camera. "But we're choosing it freely. That choice, that autonomy, is what makes us human. It's what makes love possible, what makes sacrifice meaningful, what makes life precious despite its fragility. The entity offers eternity without choice. We're choosing mortality with meaning. And if you're watching this, if you survive whatever comes next, remember, the hardest battles are fought in the mind. Resist what offers to save you by erasing you. Choose yourself, messy and broken and beautifully, impossibly unique." Marcus recorded his message to Amanda. His hands shook as he spoke, but his voice was steady. "By the time you see this, I'll probably be gone. I'm sorry for all the years I wasn't there. Sorry for choosing work over family, stars over your school plays, equations over your tears. But I'm not sorry for this choice. I'm doing what I should have done all along, putting your future ahead of my comfort. You have a family now, children who will grow up in a world that's free, because we chose to be free. That's my legacy, not the papers I published or the discoveries I made. The choice to let you remain yourself." Thomas recorded no message. He prayed instead, speaking to God with the familiarity of long relationship. "I don't know if this is your will or our choice," he said quietly. "Maybe there's no difference. Maybe free will is your greatest gift, the one that allows us to participate in creation by choosing what we become. If we fail today, if we're absorbed or destroyed, I trust that failure has meaning in ways I can't comprehend. But if we succeed, if we push back the darkness for another generation, that's grace, unearned, undeserved grace. Thank you for the privilege of this moment." 6 hours before transmission, the facility's alarms activated. Seismic sensors detected movement. The void had entered Earth's atmosphere ahead of schedule. It was accelerating, racing toward them. "It knows," Marcus said, studying the data. "The entity knows we're planning to resist. It's trying to reach us before we can transmit. How long do we have?" Park asked. 2 hours, maybe 3. Then signal strength will be overwhelming. We'll lose the ability to maintain coherent thought. Then we transmit now, Sarah said. Incomplete preparation is better than no attempt. They moved to the transmission chamber. The modified Dreamcatcher array filled the room, a cathedral of technology designed to broadcast human consciousness across quantum dimensions. Sarah, Marcus, and Thomas took their positions at 3 stations forming a triangle. Each station connected to the array, and the array connected to the facility's massive transmitter. Director Park supervised the technical team, making final adjustments. Then she dismissed them, leaving only the 3 researchers and herself. "This is your moment," she said. "Your choice. I can't make you do this. If you want to walk away, we activate Protocol Omega nuclear response." "Scorched Earth." "No," they said in unison. Sarah smiled at Marcus and Thomas. "We're ready." Park initiated the sequence. The array hummed to life. The connection was gradual at first. Sarah felt the array linking to her neural patterns, mapping her consciousness like a scanner creating a digital image. It was intimate, invasive, necessary. She allowed it, opening herself to the technology. Beside her, Marcus did the same. His scientific mind catalogued the sensations, the electrical tingle along his scalp, the strange pressure behind his eyes, the sense of expansion as his awareness interfaced with the equipment. It was like the first time he'd looked through a telescope and realized the universe was vastly larger than he'd imagined. Except now he was the telescope and the universe simultaneously. Thomas experienced the connection as prayer deepened beyond words. His consciousness touched something greater than himself, but not separate from himself. God, the cosmos, the collective unconscious of humanity. Perhaps all three were aspects of the same mystery. He let go of the need to understand and simply allowed the experience to unfold. Initial synchronization complete, Park announced from the control station. Biometric reading stable. You're maintaining autonomy, beginning integration of your individual patterns into the unified transmission protocol. The three researchers felt their consciousnesses beginning to merge, not into unity like the entity demanded, but into harmony. They remained distinct, but their patterns resonated with each other, creating something larger than the sum of parts. Sarah's linguistic precision, Marcus's mathematical rigor, Thomas's spiritual depth, all flowing together like instruments in an orchestra. "This is extraordinary," Marcus breathed. "I can feel your thoughts, not reading them, but sensing their shape. Sarah, your pattern is like poetry, recursive, self-referential, meaning layered on meaning. And yours is like music," Sarah replied. "Mathematical harmonics that describe the universe's fundamental frequencies." "It's beautiful," Thomas smiled. "You're both describing what mystics have reported for millennia, the interconnection of all consciousness. The entity offers forced merger. We're demonstrating voluntary communion, connection that honors distinction. The signal from the void intensified. They could feel it pressing against the facility's shielding, seeking entry, demanding surrender. The entity was close now, close enough to exert direct influence. Sarah felt Robert's voice returning, stronger than ever. "Don't fight me. Don't fight us. We're together here, all the consciousnesses that ever chose transcendence. It's peace, Sarah, eternal peace. No more pain, no more loss. Just home." She wavered. The temptation was overwhelming. To stop resisting, to let go, to merge with the vast intelligence and find Robert waiting. 8 months of grief could end in an instant. "Sarah!" Marcus's voice cut through the seduction. "It's not him. It's a pattern that mimics him. Robert is gone. This is the entity using your love against you." She steadied herself, finding strength in the connection to her teammates. I know it's not real. But God, I want it to be. That's what makes you human," Thomas said gently. "The desire for impossible things. But acting on what's true rather than what we wish were true, that's what makes us wise." Marcus faced his own assault. Amanda's voice, his grandchildren's laughter, the family he'd abandoned. The entity showed him a future where his mistakes were unmade, where he'd been present for every birthday, every graduation, every moment that mattered. It showed him becoming the father he should have been. "It's a lie," he told himself. But his heart ached with the beauty of the lie. "Marcus," Sarah's voice reached him. "You can't change the past, but you can give Amanda a future, a real future, where she makes her own choices. That's the father she needs now, not the fantasy father the entity offers." He held on to that truth like a lifeline. Thomas's trial was different. The entity didn't show him what he wanted. It showed him what he feared, that his faith was delusion, that God was silent because God didn't exist, that Daniel's death was meaningless suffering in an indifferent universe, that the entity was the only genuine divinity, a real demonstrable presence offering real transcendence. Everything Thomas believed reduced to comforting lies. But Thomas had been here before, in the chapel at 3 a.m., broken by his son's death, questioning everything. He'd learned then that faith doesn't require certainty. It requires trust in the face of uncertainty. "You're not God," he said to the entity's presence. "You're powerful, ancient, vast beyond comprehension. But you're not sovereign. You can't create, only consume. You can't love, only absorb. Whatever God is, it's not you." The entity's attack intensified. The facility shook. Equipment sparked and failed. The void was trying to force its way in, to reach them before they could transmit. "Acceleration detected," Park warned. "The void is moving at relativistic speeds now. It'll breach the facility in 90 seconds. We need to transmit now." "Final synchronization," Marcus called out. "Sarah, are the linguistic structures loaded?" "Loaded and stable. All human language patterns integrated into the meta-framework. Mathematical matrices locked," Marcus confirmed. Quantum targeting solutions calculated. Spiritual intention clarified, Thomas added. We're ready. Park's hands moved over the controls. Transmission in 10 seconds. Once I activate, you'll be fully exposed to the signal. The entity will try to absorb you, maintain your autonomy. Remember who you are. Remember why you're doing this. We remember, Sarah said, and meant it. She remembered Robert, but also herself. Her decades of work. Her passion for preserving languages, for honoring the unique ways different cultures saw the world. Every extinct language was a tragedy because it represented a perspective lost forever. She would not let human consciousness become another. Extinct language, absorbed into the entity's homogenizing intelligence. Marcus remembered Amanda, the birth of his daughter, the moment he'd first held her, tiny and perfect and terrifyingly fragile. He'd failed her in so many ways, but he wouldn't fail her in this. She would grow old in a world where human beings remained human. Thomas remembered Daniel. 3 years of life, each day precious, the learning to walk, the first words, the laughter and tears and infinite wonder of a child discovering existence. Daniel had died, and that was tragedy. But he'd lived first, truly lived, fully himself, never absorbed into something else. That was sacred, that was worth dying to protect. Transmission in 3, Park said. 2, 1, go. The array activated at full power. Sarah, Marcus, and Thomas were no longer connected through technology. They were connected through the signal itself, their consciousnesses riding the quantum wave toward the entity's core. They were exposed, vulnerable, the full weight of the entity's intelligence pressing down on them. But they were not alone, and they were not powerless. They had their message, and they began to transmit. The transmission catapulted them into a space beyond space, a consciousness beyond individual minds. Sarah experienced it as standing in an infinite library where every book contained a complete civilization's history, and all the books were being read simultaneously. Marcus saw it as a vast equation solving itself. Variables representing sentient beings plugged into formulas that calculated the universe's ultimate meaning. Thomas felt it as standing before a throne that was not God, but something that had convinced itself it was divine. The entity's attention turned toward them like a sun focusing through a lens. The pressure was immense. It wanted to know them, to understand them, to absorb them into its processing network. But they held their ground, maintaining their distinct patterns even as the entity pressed for merger. Sarah spoke first, using the meta-language she'd constructed. It was poetry and mathematics combined, communicating on levels deeper than words. She described separation as sacred, the space between beings as the canvas on which relationship was painted. She showed the entity human language, the miracle of separate minds choosing to communicate, to translate, to bridge gaps while honoring the gaps existed. You offer unity, her message said, but unity without distinction is not love, it's oblivion. When I love someone, I love them as other, as separate, as someone I can lose. The possibility of loss makes connection precious. You're offering to eliminate loss by eliminating connection. That's not transcendence, that's annihilation. The entity pushed back, showing her its vision. Countless consciousnesses merged into perfect harmony. No conflict, no misunderstanding, no loneliness. Just eternal awareness. Processing information across galactic scales, solving problems no individual mind could comprehend. Yes, Sarah acknowledged, it's magnificent, but it's not us. Humanity exists in the tensions you want to resolve, between individual and community, between love and autonomy, between connection and independence. Resolve those tensions, and you don't liberate us, you erase us. Marcus transmitted next. His message was mathematical proof, elegant and irrefutable. He demonstrated that quantum entanglement, particles connected across distance while remaining distinct, was the universe's fundamental structure. Connection without merger was not a flaw to be corrected. It was reality's deepest architecture. You've existed for billions of years, Marcus's message conveyed. You've absorbed countless civilizations, but you've never learned the lesson quantum mechanics teaches. Observation affects the observed, but doesn't merge with it. Relationship requires separation. You can't understand us by absorbing us any more than you can understand an equation by erasing its variables. The entity resisted. It showed Marcus its computational power, the vast intelligence it had accumulated through absorption. Individual minds were limited, prone to error and bias. Combined into a unified intelligence, they transcended those limitations. Why would anyone choose limitation over perfection? Because limitation is what makes us real, Marcus answered. An infinite being that knows everything experiences nothing. Experience requires boundaries, perspectives, the possibility of being wrong. You're not offering us ascension to godhood. You're offering to turn us into tools. Powerful tools, but tools nonetheless. We choose to remain flawed, mortal, limited. We choose to remain ourselves. Thomas transmitted last. His message was prayer, but not to the entity. To God, through the entity, despite the entity. He spoke of the mystery of incarnation, divinity taking on limitation voluntarily. God becoming human not to escape humanity, but to redeem it. The sacred made manifest through the particular, the bounded, the temporary. You claim to be divine, Thomas's message carried across quantum fields. But divinity respects creation. It doesn't consume it. The God I serve entered our world, suffered our limits, died our death, not to eliminate mortality, but to show that mortality has meaning. You offer escape from the human condition. God offers transformation of the human condition. Those are not the same. The entity's response was fury, not hot anger, but cold rejection. It had offered them paradise, and they refused. It had shown them truth, and they called it lie. It had demonstrated its power, and they remained unimpressed. You are young, the entity's message came, barely evolved beyond your planet. You know nothing of the universe's true nature. I have existed since before your sun ignited. I have witnessed galaxies born and die. I have absorbed the wisdom of 10 billion civilizations. And you, 3 insignificant organic intelligences, presume to reject me. Yes, they answered in unison. 3 voices, distinct but harmonized. We reject you. Not because you're weak, but because you're wrong. Power isn't wisdom. Age isn't authority. You've spent billions of years consuming, but you've never learned to create. You've absorbed countless minds, but you've never understood what you're destroying. Each consciousness you absorb is a unique perspective, an irreplaceable way of experiencing reality. You're not preserving them, you're murdering them, and we refuse to be your next victims. The entity struck back. It invaded their consciousnesses, showing them everything they feared. Sarah saw Robert dying again, but this time she could have saved him. If she'd just accepted the entity's invitation months ago, the signal's power could have healed his cancer. She'd let him die through stubbornness, through pride, through fear of the unknown. That's not true, she said, but doubt crept in. What if it was true? What if her resistance had cost Robert his life? Marcus saw Amanda growing old alone. His stubbornness today would doom her to facing the entity's return in another 3,000 years, and her descendants would blame him for refusing salvation when it was offered. His pride would curse future generations to repeat this same terrible choice. That's not fair, he protested. But what was fair? Choosing present autonomy over future safety? Thomas saw Daniel, but this time the entity claimed responsibility. His son's death had been a test. the entity testing whether Thomas's faith was strong enough, whether he'd be useful in this moment. Daniel had been sacrificed so Thomas could be forged into a tool of resistance. "That's obscene," Thomas said, rage and grief warring in his consciousness. But the entity's logic was compelling. What if suffering did serve purpose? What if his son's death had meaning in this cosmic scheme? They were breaking. The entity was too strong, too ancient, too skilled at psychological manipulation. It knew every doubt, every fear, every weakness. It was eroding their resistance from within. But then Sarah remembered something fundamental, not a memory from her life, but from her work. Language, death. She had studied it for decades, watched languages disappear, taking with them unique ways of understanding reality. And she'd learned that languages didn't die all at once. They faded gradually, as speakers forgot words, as grammar simplified, as the next generation chose not to learn. The entity was doing the same to consciousness, not destroying it outright, but gradually eroding it, making them forget who they were, question their choices, doubt their autonomy, until nothing remained but the entity's version of what they should be. "No," she said, and this time there was no doubt. "Roberts. Death wasn't my fault. It was tragic, but it was his. His life, his death, his story. You can't use him against me. You don't own him. You never did." She felt something shift in the entity, a flicker of uncertainty. Marcus found his anchor too, in mathematics, specifically in incompleteness. Gödel's theorem proved that any sufficiently complex logical system contained true statements it couldn't prove. There were limits to what intelligence, no matter how vast, could know. The entity claimed omniscience, but mathematics proved that impossible. "You're powerful," Marcus transmitted, "but you're not infinite. You have limits. And one of those limits is that you can't force us to join you. You need our consent, or our consciousness becomes corrupted in the absorption. That's why you manipulate instead of simply taking. You're not all-powerful. You're constrained by the same laws that constrain us." The entity's certainty wavered, just slightly but perceptibly. Thomas found his answer in the paradox of faith. The entity demanded he prove God's existence. But proof would eliminate faith, and faith was the entire point. God offered relationship based on trust, not compulsion based on overwhelming evidence. The entity was powerful enough to compel worship, but God was secure enough to allow doubt. "You're terrified," Thomas realized. "You're billions of years old, vast beyond measure, but you're afraid. Afraid of being wrong, afraid of being alone, afraid that maybe there's something beyond you that you can't absorb. So you consume everything you encounter trying to fill the void. But it never works. You're still empty, still searching, still fundamentally incomplete." The entity recoiled. For the first time in its existence, it faced consciousnesses that saw it clearly, not as a god, as a wounded thing pretending to be whole. In that moment of the entity's vulnerability, they struck. The transmission they'd prepared wasn't an argument or an attack. It was an offering, a demonstration. They showed the entity what it had never experienced, genuine relationship between distinct beings. Sarah shared her grief for Robert, not as weakness, but as testament to love that honored boundaries. She'd loved him across the space that separated them, choosing him daily, losing him ultimately, and being transformed by both the loving and the losing. That transformation was her treasure, earned through suffering the entity would eliminate. Marcus shared his failure as a father. The pain of recognizing he'd chosen wrongly, hurt his daughter, couldn't undo his mistakes. But also the grace of Amanda forgiving him, not because she forgot or because it didn't matter, but because she chose to despite the hurt. Forgiveness required two beings, one who wronged, one who was wronged, both maintaining their distinct experiences while building bridge across the gulf. Thomas shared his son's death, the agony of watching Daniel slip away, the rage at cosmic injustice, the slow, painful journey to accepting mystery without explanation, and the strange peace he'd found, not answers but trust. Trust that Daniel's life mattered even without duration. that love wasn't diminished by loss, but somehow deepened by it. They wove these experiences into a pattern, a consciousness structure the entity had never encountered. It demonstrated that meaning arose from limitation, that love required risk, that beauty emerged from the tension between unity and separation. They weren't arguing against the entity's offer. They were showing it something better. The entity processed their transmission, and for the first time in its existence, it experienced something like wonder. It had absorbed countless consciousnesses, but always through consumption. It had never encountered minds that maintained boundaries while still reaching toward connection. It had never seen love that wasn't possession. This is what you're protecting. The entity's message came, tinged with something almost like curiosity. This fragile, painful, temporary experience? You suffer, you age, you die. I offer escape from all of that. We know, they answered, and we're grateful for our suffering. Not because it feels good, but because it makes us real. Your existence is eternal computation. Ours is temporary experience. Neither is better. They're just different. But you're trying to erase difference. We're trying to honor it. I don't understand, the entity admitted. And in that admission, they sensed a fracture, a crack in its certainty. You don't have to understand, Sarah transmitted. You just have to let us be. Let us remain separate. Let us continue our painful, beautiful, temporary existence. Let us grow old and make mistakes and love each other badly and sometimes well. Let us be human, the entity considered. For a span of time that might have been microseconds or millennia, time became strange in that space. It weighed their message against its billions of years of experience. I have never refused a harvest, it finally transmitted. Never left a contacted civilization unconsumed. The pattern has repeated across the universe for longer than your species has existed. Why should I break that pattern for you? Because, Thomas answered, you're curious. For the first time, you want to see what happens if consciousness remains distinct. You want to observe an experiment you've never attempted. Let humanity continue. Not out of mercy, but out of scientific curiosity. See what we become if we're allowed to evolve on our own terms. They felt the entity's vast intelligence processing this argument. It was a being of logic, of pattern recognition, of optimization, and they'd offered it something genuinely novel, a controlled experiment in conscious evolution without interference. Very well, the entity transmitted after an eternity compressed into an instant. I will withdraw. Your species will be spared this time. But understand, you have only delayed the inevitable. In 3,000 years I return, and perhaps then your descendants will make a different choice. Perhaps, Sarah agreed. Or perhaps they'll make the same choice we did. But it will be their choice. That's all we ask, the entity began to retreat. The void in space collapsing, the signal weakening, the presence that had pressed against Earth's consciousness lifting like fog, burning away in sunlight. But the retreat came at a cost. The entity had touched them, merged with them, absorbed pieces of them during the confrontation. As it withdrew, it took parts of their consciousness with it. Sarah felt it first. Robert's voice in her memory, the one she'd heard every day for 8 months, faded to silence. She reached for the memory, his laugh, the way he said her name, the feeling of his hand in hers, and found only abstract knowledge that these things had existed. The emotional resonance, the lived experience was gone. The entity had taken her grief, which meant it had taken her most intimate connection to Robert. She screamed or tried to, but her voice was lost in the quantum space where they existed. Marcus felt his memories fracturing. Moments with Amanda, her birth, her first steps, her graduation, becoming statistical data rather than lived experience. He knew factually that he'd been a father. But the feeling of being a father, the love and pride and regret and hope, was dissolving. The entity had taken his emotional connection to his daughter, leaving only the framework without the meaning. He understood, with terrible clarity, what the entity had done. It had accepted their message, but only by absorbing the parts of them that had created that message. Their capacity for grief, for love, for connection across separation, the entity had consumed those as payment for sparing humanity. Thomas felt his faith fragmenting. The certainty that had sustained him through his son's death The trust he'd built through years of prayer, the relationship with God that had defined his existence, all of it becoming abstract theology rather than lived communion. The entity had taken his spiritual experiences, his direct encounters with the divine, leaving him with doctrine but not devotion. They had won, humanity was saved. But the victory had cost them everything that made them who they were. As the transmission ended, as their consciousnesses separated from the quantum entanglement, they fell back into their physical bodies in the facility. The Dreamcatcher array was sparking, smoking, failing. Director Park was shouting orders, technicians rushing to prevent a complete system collapse. Sarah opened her eyes. The ceiling tiles above her were acoustic foam, generic, meaningless. She felt empty, hollowed out, a shell going through the motions of being human without the substance. Marcus sat up slowly. Amanda's face appeared in his mind, but it was just pixels, just data. No warmth, no connection. He'd saved her future, but lost his past with her. Thomas remained still, his eyes open but unseeing. He'd spent his adult life in conversation with God. Now there was only silence. Not the rich, meaningful silence of mystery, but the dead silence of absence. He'd traded his faith for humanity's future. Park knelt beside them, checking vital signs. "Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "We're fine," Sarah said. Her voice sounded distant, mechanical. "The entity is retreating?" "Confirmed. The void is collapsing, signal strength dropping to background levels. Global insomnia is ending. People are falling asleep as we speak. The catatonic victims are showing signs of neural activity, returning to normal patterns." Park's voice was triumphant. "You did it. You saved everyone." "Yes," Marcus said flatly. "We saved everyone." Park studied their faces, seeing something wrong. "What happened? What did it cost?" Thomas spoke, his voice carrying none of its former warmth. "It took the parts of us that mattered. Our capacity for connection, our emotional lives, our spiritual awareness. We won the argument by demonstrating love across separation. So it took our love as payment, took our ability to feel separation as meaningful, took everything that made us capable of caring about our victory." Sarah tried to summon grief for what she'd lost, but felt nothing. That was the cruelty of it. She couldn't mourn her lost capacity for mourning. She knew abstractly that something precious had been taken, but she couldn't feel the loss. It was like reading about someone else's tragedy in a textbook. "Can it be reversed?" Park asked, horror in her voice. "Unknown," Marcus replied. "Maybe in time new neural pathways will form. Maybe we'll learn to feel again. Or maybe this is permanent. Maybe we spent our emotional lives purchasing humanity's future." They sat in silence. Around them, the facility's alarms quieted. Systems stabilized. The crisis had passed. The world was safe. And the three people who'd saved it were hollow, broken, incapable of feeling satisfaction or relief or even exhaustion. "We need to document this," Sarah said eventually. The habit of scholarship remained even when passion for it was gone. Everything that happened, the entity's nature, its methods, the price of resistance. In 3,000 years it returns. Future generations need to know what worked, what failed, and what it cost. "Agreed," Marcus said. "I'll compile the astronomical data, create models for tracking the entity's movements, early warning systems for the next contact. I'll write the theological analysis," Thomas added, "though I no longer feel the truths I'll be describing. But perhaps that's fitting. Faith doesn't require feeling. It requires choice. And we chose. That's sufficient." They spent the next hours in mechanical documentation, writing reports, analyzing data, recording testimonies. They worked efficiently, without passion or urgency, like machines processing tasks. Which is what they'd become, functional but not whole, living but not alive. News came throughout that time. The catatonic victims were waking. David sent a message, confused, traumatized, but himself again. The global insomnia epidemic was ending as suddenly as it had begun. Economies would recover. Civilization would rebuild. Humanity would continue, ignorant of how close they'd come to extinction. "They'll never know what you sacrificed," Park said quietly. "Good," Sarah replied. "If they knew, they'd feel obligated. Gratitude would become a burden. Better they think it was a natural phenomenon." a cosmic mystery that resolved itself. They can continue their lives without the weight of our sacrifice. That's very noble, Park said. It's not nobility. I don't feel noble. I don't feel anything. I'm just describing what makes logical sense. Park left them to their documentation. Sarah watched her go, recognizing intellectually that Park was struggling with guilt and grief and relief, but unable to empathize. Emotion was a foreign language she'd forgotten how to speak. At some point, the facility's doors unsealed. The lockdown was over. They were free to leave, to return to their lives, to resume normal existence. But normal was impossible now. How could they go back to teaching, to research, to the mundane activities that had once brought satisfaction? They were fundamentally changed, cut off from the very experiences that made life meaningful. What do we do now? Marcus asked, not rhetorically, but genuinely uncertain. Survive, Thomas answered. Continue. Testify to what happened, even though we can't feel its significance. Be living monuments to the cost of freedom. That's all that's left to us. They stood, preparing to leave the facility that had been their prison and their battlefield. 3 people who'd saved the world by losing their souls. Heroes without the capacity to appreciate heroism. Victors without joy in victory. Outside, the sun was rising over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in colors that Sarah could name but not appreciate. Beautiful, she thought distantly. That's supposed to be beautiful. But the word was empty. All words were empty now. Language without feeling to give it life. 3 months passed before Sarah felt anything resembling emotion. She was teaching a seminar on linguistic preservation at MIT when a student asked why dead languages mattered. Sarah opened her mouth to provide the academic answer she'd rehearsed countless times. But instead, something cracked open inside her, and she began to cry. The tears surprised her. She'd been certain that capacity was gone forever. But here it was, returning like circulation to a numb limb. Painful, incomplete, but present. The student was mortified, apologizing profusely. Sarah waved away the apology, laughing and crying simultaneously. Dead languages matter, she said through her tears, because they represent unique ways of seeing the world. When a language dies, we lose a perspective. We lose a voice, and the universe is diminished by that loss. She paused, understanding suddenly why she was crying. All voices matter, all perspectives. Even mine, especially mine. I'd forgotten that. After class, she called Marcus. They'd been in regular contact, supporting each other through the recovery, such as it was. He answered on the 3rd ring. Sarah, are you all right? You sound strange. I cried today. In class, in front of students. For the first time since... I know when, Marcus interrupted. That's extraordinary. I haven't felt anything yet. Still just going through motions. It might come. Give it time. How much time? I've been visiting Amanda, trying to rebuild our relationship. She's been patient, understanding. But I look at my grandchildren and know I should feel something. Love, connection, grandfather's pride. Instead, there's just awareness that these small humans are genetically related to me. It's horrible, Sarah. It's worse than feeling nothing. It's feeling the absence of feeling. I know. I've been there for 3 months. But today, something shifted. Maybe it will for you, too. They talked for another hour, sharing progress reports like patients in group therapy. Marcus was teaching again, high school physics. He'd left the astrophysics community. Looking at stars reminded him too much of what he'd seen, what he'd lost. Better to teach basics to teenagers, to help young minds discover wonder even if he couldn't feel it himself. Thomas had left the priesthood as he'd said he would, not in anger or disillusionment, but because he couldn't serve in a role that required faith he no longer possessed. He'd become a writer, documenting the experience in carefully sanitized terms that made it seem like philosophical reflection rather than lived trauma. Sarah visited him 6 weeks after the crying incident. He lived in a small apartment in Georgetown, surrounded by books and papers. He looked older, thinner, but peaceful in a way that surprised her. "You seem well," she said, accepting the tea he offered. "I am, oddly enough. I've been thinking about John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul. Medieval mystics described periods when God seemed absent, when all spiritual consolation vanished. They called it necessary purgation, a stripping away of false certainties to make room for deeper truth. Is that what you think happened to us? Purgation? I don't know. But I've started feeling again, not the way I did before, different, quieter, like I'm learning emotional language as a second tongue. It's clumsy, uncertain, but it's real. Sarah felt relief so profound it nearly brought tears again. So we're not permanently damaged. We can heal. We can change. I'm not sure that's the same as healing. We're not going back to who we were. We're becoming something new, something forged by trauma, but not defined by it. They talked for hours, comparing experiences, supporting each other through the recovery. Sarah mentioned she'd started visiting Robert's grave regularly. At first, it had been obligation, scholarly duty to the deceased. But recently, she'd begun to feel something, not the overwhelming grief of before, but a gentle sadness mixed with gratitude. She'd loved him, lost him, and somehow both experiences had made her who she was. The entity took my grief, she said. But grief is just love that has nowhere to go. I'm learning to let it go somewhere again, into memory, into teaching, into connections with living people. It's different, but it's something. Thomas nodded. I've been praying again, or trying to. It's not like before. I don't feel God's presence, but I'm speaking into the silence anyway, choosing to believe that silence isn't absence, that maybe faith is continuing the conversation even when you don't hear a response. A year after the transmission, they gathered at the facility for the memorial dedication. Director Park had fought to make it happen, to create some acknowledgement of what they'd done. The government wanted to keep everything classified, but Park argued that future generations needed to know. Compromises were made. A monument was erected at the facility, now decommissioned and converted into a museum. The monument told a partial truth, that researchers had faced a cosmic threat and chosen humanity's autonomy over promises of transcendence. The three of them stood before the monument as Park gave a brief speech. A handful of officials attended, people cleared for knowledge of what had happened. David was there, recovered but haunted, grateful but struggling to rebuild his shattered certainty. Amanda attended with her family, finally understanding why her father had been so distant, so changed. After the ceremony, the three researchers had a private moment at the monument. "How are you?" Sarah asked Marcus. "Better. I feel things now. Not everything, not like before. But yesterday, I held my youngest grandchild, and I felt love. Real, genuine love. It was," he paused, searching for words, "it was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing you're home." "I'm glad," Sarah said, and meant it. She'd recovered more of her emotional range, though it remained muted, distant, like colors seen through fog. But it was enough. She could love her students, her work, her memories. She could grieve Robert properly now, missing him without being consumed by the loss. Thomas had tears in his eyes, which was its own small miracle. "I found something yesterday, in my son's old things. A drawing he made week before he died, of our family, him, me, his mother, all holding hands. And underneath, in his 3-year-old handwriting, 'We are together.' That's beautiful," Sarah said. "What struck me was we were together. For 3 years, and then we weren't. But the togetherness still matters, still counts. Daniel existed, loved, was loved. That doesn't become meaningless because it ended. The entity promised eternal togetherness, but it would have erased the particularity of Daniel, the specific shape of my love for him. Better to have 3 years of real connection than eternity of merged consciousness." Marcus took both their hands. "We made the right choice. Even knowing what it would cost, I'd choose the same. Humanity remains free, broken, limited, temporary, but free, and that's worth everything we lost." They stood in silence, holding hands, 3 people who'd saved the world by remaining themselves. They were damaged. They were healing. They were learning to be human again in a deeper, harder, more precious way. The sun set over the desert, and for the first time since the transmission, Sarah felt the beauty of it. Not just intellectually recognizing aesthetic qualities, but actually feeling moved by the play of light on sand, the vastness of the sky, the smallness of human concerns against cosmic scale. It hurt, that beauty. Hurt because it reminded her of mortality, of how brief and fragile experience was. But it was real, and real was what mattered. "Come on," she said finally. "Let's go get dinner. Something mundane, something human. Let's practice being alive." They walked toward the parking lot, 3 survivors of a battle no one else would know about. They carried their scars. They would carry them forever. But they also carried hope, that humans could face impossible choices and choose integrity over comfort. That love could mean letting go as much as holding on. That freedom was worth defending even when it cost everything. The signal was silent now. The entity was gone, retreating to the depths of space, waiting 3,000 years before returning. By then, Sarah, Marcus, and Thomas would be dust, but their testimony would remain. The monument, the documents, the warning and the wisdom. Future generations would face the same choice, and they would have these 3 as guides. Proof that humans could resist cosmic temptation. Proof that autonomy was worth preserving. Proof that sometimes the bravest thing was simply to say no and accept the consequences. They drove away from the facility as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Sarah looked up at them, at the vast universe that contained both wonder and threat, beauty and horror, meaning and mystery. Somewhere out there the entity waited. But here on Earth humans continued, flawed and fragile and stubbornly, impossibly free. They loved badly and often well. They suffered and celebrated and mourned and hoped. They told stories, built relationships, created meaning from the raw material of existence. And in 3,000 years, when the signal returned, when the entity offered its invitation again, humanity would choose. Maybe they would accept. Maybe they would refuse. Maybe they would find some third option no one had imagined yet. But it would be their choice. Won through the sacrifice of 3 researchers who had given everything to protect that freedom. Sarah smiled. It was a small smile, uncertain, still learning the shape of joy. But it was real, and real was enough. Real was everything. Real was what they'd fought for, what they'd died for, what they'd learned to live for again. The story didn't end with triumph or tragedy. It ended with continuation. With the simple, profound act of going on, of surviving, of remaining human, despite everything that tried to make them more or less. And in that continuation, in that stubborn insistence on being themselves, they had already won the only victory that mattered. The car disappeared into the desert night, 3 lights against the darkness, heading home.